Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Thank you so very much for joining us. My name is Jacqueline Lukman. I am a member of the Black Alliance for Peace outreach team. Everyone, good evening. Thank you so very much. I apologize. I've got a little feedback here, but we want to apologize for the delay. We had a little bit of technical difficulties, but we are here, and I am very excited to look in the chat and see people literally from all over the world in on this webinar, from people in all over the contiguous United States, from our brothers and sisters in Kingston, Jamaica, man, to our brothers and sisters in the Congo, other places on the continent, from Canada. We welcome you, Black Alliance for Peace. Thanks you so much for joining us. And tonight, we are very proud to be able to put on this webinar for you to commemorate a somber occasion, which would be the assassination of Malcolm X, or El Hajj Malik el-Shabazz, upon his return from Mecca. He was assassinated on February 21st, 1965. But we commemorate this occasion with education, and an education focused on what Malcolm was focused on at the time of his death, the work that was cut short that we continue. And by we, I mean Black Alliance for Peace. For those of you who may not be familiar with the organization, Black Alliance for Peace seeks to recapture and redevelop the historic anti-war, anti-imperialist, and pro-peace positions of the Black radical movement through educational activities, organizing, movement support, organizations, and individuals. We will work to oppose militarized domestic state reprisals, the policies of destabilization, subversion, and the permanent war agenda of the US state globally. So Malcolm and this mission of people-centered human rights. Malcolm X understood and framed the struggle for human rights for Black people in the context of the international struggle of all people around the world oppressed by imperialism and colonialism and capitalism. Malcolm believed that international solidarity between Black people and other working class, poor, and oppressed people around the world would give those in the struggle more leverage and advance that struggle for peace for all oppressed people. This is why Malcolm co-founded the Organization of Afro-American Unity in 1964 with several other luminaries, including John Henrik Clarke, after Malcolm visited Africa earlier that year and was impressed by the Organization for African Unity that Kwame Nkrumah founded in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia in 1963, co-founded. The OAAU was formed to fight for the human rights of African Americans and promote cooperation among Africans and people of African descent in the Americas and around the world. And that is the basis for our focus on Malcolm X and the Black internationalist struggle for peace and people-centered human rights. That is what we are focused on tonight. So to enter us into this discussion, we have four dynamic and amazing speakers. Each speaker will have 10 minutes to speak, but I want to introduce them all to you. And then I am going to move out of the way, let them have the floor, because I'm waiting for this discussion too. So first in our speaker lineup will be Dr. Sharice Burden-Stelly. She is the 2020-2021 visiting scholar in the Race and Capitalism Project at the University of Chicago. She is currently an assistant professor of Africana Studies and Political Science at Carleton College and the co-leader of Black Alliance for Peace's research team. A scholar of critical Black studies, political theory, political economy, and intellectual history, Dr. Burden-Stelly is the co-author with the fabulous Gerald Horne of W.E.B. Du Bois, A Life in American History. Her published work appears in journals including Small Axe, Souls, Du Bois Review, Socialism and Democracy, International Journey of Africana Studies, and the C.L.R. James Journal. Dr. Burton Stelly's public scholarship can be found in venues including Monthly Review, Boston Review, Black Agenda Report, and Black Perspectives. She's all over the place, and she should be. Welcome, Dr. Burton Stelly. Then next, we have Djibo Sobukwe. Djibo Sobukwe is a Black Alliance for Peace research team member and former longtime member of the Central Committee of the All African People's Revolutionary Party, who worked with Kwame Ture on the Political Education Committee and the Nkrumah Ture Task Force. He was recently interviewed on the radio show Voices with Vision about an article he wrote in Black Agenda Report on Sekou Toure's concept of class struggle. Welcome, Djibo, and please check out Voices with Vision. Next on the panel, we will have Esther Ojulari. Esther is a South African, Nigerian, British human rights and racial justice activist activist who lives and works in the Pacific coast of Colombia. She is a sociologist with a master's degree in human rights and a PhD candidate at the University of London, where she is finishing a thesis on decolonial and people-centered approaches to transitional justice and reparation for the Afro-descended people in Colombia. She worked as a consultant at the Anti-Discrimination Unit of the OHCHR in Geneva for 8 years, during which time she has worked on several projects accompanying the work of the UN Working Group of Experts on People of African Descent within the framework of the UN Decade for People of African Descent and accompanying missions. She's currently regional coordinator in Buenaventura and Northern Cauca for the Colombian Human Rights NGO and other organizations. Welcome, Esther. And finally, we will have speaking Kali Akuno. Kali is a co-founder and director of Cooperation Jackson, which is an emerging network of worker cooperatives and supporting institutions. Cooperation Jackson is fighting to create economic democracy by creating a vibrant solidarity economy in Jackson, Mississippi that will help transform Mississippi and the South. You can find more information about Cooperation Jackson at www.cooperationjackson.org. Welcome, Kali Akuno. All right, again, speakers, you will each have 10 minutes to speak, and I am going to mute myself and enjoy Dr. Burton Stelly as I give her the floor. Dr. Burton Stelly, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you, Jacqueline, for that introduction, and thank you everybody for being here tonight. I'm delighted to be presenting with such distinguished comrades. And so I have been tasked with giving some sort of historical and theoretical context for the conversation this evening. And so I just want to start off by saying that if we understand that capitalism is a war-driven, racially hierarchical political economy, if we understand whiteness as a militarized, class collaborationist identity politics for which white supremacy is its material and ideological practice, and if we understand that settler colonialism, internal colonialism, and neo-colonialism are rooted in capitalism, white supremacy, and imperialism, and reproduce the conditions of violence and occupation, then we can understand why colonized, racialized, oppressed, and exploited peoples have historically linked peace and people-centered human rights. So Malcolm X is part of a long tradition of what we might call radical Black peace activism, which is it's fundamental to, but often forgotten in, the modern Black liberation movement. This mode of peace activism was internationalist in scope and made the link between the cessation of global conflict, disarmament, non-proliferation of nuclear arms, racial equality, self-determination, international cooperation, economic progress, the end of imperialism, colonialism, and neo-colonialism, and the eradication of capitalist exploitation. So that is to say, this is not no kumbaya peace activism. This is peace activism for a truly safe and equitable and flourishing worlds. So the elimination of war is not just the absence of military conflict, it's the historical fulfillment of equality, justice, and the end of exploitation and oppression. Radical Black mobilization for peace, in turn, is part of a broader radical Black struggle for human rights that also emerged out of this World War II moment, or the Second Imperialist War, as we call it. And this struggle was predicated on a few fundamental ideas, which include that the national oppression in the United States and colonialism internationally are expressions of this global white supremacist, capitalist, imperialist, patriarchal structure. And so a stance for human rights required linking both of these forms of oppression. It's also built on this idea that reliance on the US Constitution as a guarantor for Negro rights, so to speak, was limited because of the narrow scope of rights and because of the, the vagaries of the US Constitution, lest we forget the 3/5 compromise, etc. And so mobilization needed to move beyond the US Constitution because of this fickle judicial history. It's also predicated on this idea of internationalism, which highlights that racial oppression in the United States must be exposed in international forums to build transnational political and organizational links with other oppressed peoples, with a special emphasis on Africa, because as we know, if Africa and Africans are not free, none of us in the diaspora are free. And it's also based on this idea that even the liberal form of human rights serves as a counter-hegemonic framework against the sort of the reigning white supremacist capitalist logics, if they're actually applied to their logical conclusion. And finally, the realization of human rights required the linking of issues of democracy and social justice anchored in social movements, organizing against all forms of oppression and for the self-determination of all people. So this is the sort of the radical idea of human rights that really arose after the Second World War. And we see these dynamics operating in 3 petitions that were filed with the UN. The first was filed by the National Negro Congress, and this was called a petition to the United Nations on behalf of 13 million oppressed Negro citizens of the United States. And this was filed in 1946. When this petition was buried by the US delegation to the UN, the NAACP, under the editorship of W.E.B. Du Bois, filed an appeal to the world, a statement on the denial of human rights to minorities in the case of citizens of Negro descent in the United States of America, and an appeal to the United Nations for redress in 1947. That is a mouthful. This petition, again, was buried by the US delegation, not least some of y'all's fave, Eleanor Roosevelt. She was not on the right side of history in this one. And then finally, in 1951, we had the We Charge Genocide, the historic petition to the United Nations for relief from a crime of the United States government against the Negro people. This was filed in 1951 with the Genocide Convention. And I won't go into the details here so I can stick to my time frame, but essentially these petitions were meant to agitate, educate, and to galvanize broader movements, not only in the United States, but internationally, not only on behalf of African Americans, but rather on behalf of all oppressed people, with a particular emphasis on the ways that a third world war would result in the immiseration of all people, but especially those subjected to colonialism and imperialism. And so we also see radical peace activism and radical human rights brought together in resolutions passed at the 1945 Pan-African Conference, at the 1955 Bandung Conference, at the All-African Peoples Conference in December 1958, at the 1961 Non-Aligned Movement Conference, at the founding of the Organization of African Unity in 1963, and also in the Tricontinental Conference of 1966, among many others. And it's out of this radical Black human rights tradition that the people-centered human rights framework emerges, the framework of the Black Alliance for Peace, to fundamentally challenge the narrow civil rights framework and the liberal specifications of human rights. So PCHR is a political project emanating from the analysis of all forms of oppressive relations, including capitalism, neoliberalism, white supremacy, patriarchy, imperialism, And these as the structural and ideological impediments to the realization of human rights that actually lead to human flourishing. And I am one who loves quotes. And so I just want to end here with a few quotes from some of my faves that sum up the points I have just presented. So in an article called Negroes in the Ranks of the World Front Fighting for Peace and Progress, Paul Robeson wrote on June 2nd, 1949, quote, "One of the problems that is confronting America today is the so-called Negro problem. Even this problem is connected with the fight for peace and progress, not only in America, but throughout the world. I would like to stress that the Negro problem is only one phase of the labor problem. The emancipation fight of the Negroes is closely connected with the fight of the labor class because discrimination against Negroes is a desire to ensure cheap labor. This is why the majority of Negroes are in the camp for peace and progress." In her 1951 piece, "For the Unity of Women and the Cause for Peace," Claudia Jones wrote, quote, Now more than ever, the Negro people understand the full significance of US military aggression in Korea. They see the bloody massacre of the people in Korea as an extension of the foul white supremacy and oppression and contempt for Negro people and the colored people of all of Asia. It is therefore possible to organize the broadest type of peace activities among the Negro women. This is necessary in the self-interest of the Negro people. And the merger of this anti-imperialist current with the broader labor, people's, women's, and youth peace movements will greatly strengthen the peace camp as a whole, end quote. And this is, I have a long quote from W.B. Du Bois, but I have about a minute left, so I'll just try to race through it. Okay, so in 1953, Du Bois appeared on a television program with the radical councilman Vito Mark Antonio, and he said, we have not become the most warlike nation in all history because we hate our fellow man. We are for worldwide war because we have listened to and believed those who tell us that we ourselves are in great danger. This we know is untrue. If any nations in the world today fear America, it is because we seem determined to make it impossible for them to live as they wish. Sounds familiar, right? These nations include not only communists, but capitalist and neutral states. No nation in the world today wishes to change our way of life by force. Why are we told this lie with insistence and endless repetition in newspapers, magazines, books, plays, and broadcasts? Only because there are persons and powerful interests in the United States and elsewhere who control communication and hope to gain wealth and more power through world war, who want land free and labor cheap, not only in Asia and Africa, but in Russia and the Balkans, who want to break the power of organized labor in this nation and in Western Europe so as to increase private profit, and who still cherish the dream of a South America and Caribbean controlled by British, French, and American corporations. We must see through this wicked conspiracy. The nation which willingly listens to lies and refuses to know the truth will never be free. He goes on to say, cease fire now, bring back our troops, dismantle our costly forts that encircle the world, stop our aid to empires trying to conquer colonial peoples struggling desperately to be free, cut our impossible tax burden, house our people, educate our children, and declare a world policy of peace on earth, goodwill to all men, end quote. And as we see, this is radical Black peace activism and people-centered human rights. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Burton-Stelly. That was amazing. And next, Djibo Sobukwe, you have the floor. Please unmute yourself and yes, please commence. You have 10 minutes, sir.
Okay, thank you for that introduction and greetings. It's a pleasure and an honor to be on this esteemed panel about Malcolm X. White supremacist, patriarchal, capitalist settler colonialism and imperialism dehumanizes the world. This dehumanization has met fierce, constant resistance over time, and Malcolm X stands out as one of our greatest warriors in the fight for decolonization, Black power, Pan-Africanism, and internationalism, which have all been a part of the struggle to rehumanize us. Malcolm, understanding the ideological struggle as the most crucial struggle, always demanded that we think for ourselves. He always pointed out that the Western press was one of the most powerful tools used to brainwash people in condoning the crimes of US imperialism. In this regard, Malcolm played a huge role in helping us to decolonize our thinking in many ways. I'll give some examples. When he told Black people in the US, you can't hate the roots of a tree and not hate the tree. You can't hate your origins and not hate yourself. You can't hate Africa and not end up hating yourself, unquote. This is part of the struggle against internalized racism and oppression that Malcolm and others helped us wage, because they understood that centuries of white supremacist capitalism has created complexes in us that forms part of what Fanon called that mental rot that must be uprooted. He also said, you can't understand what's going on in Mississippi unless you understand what's going on in Congo. And again, helping us in our Pan-African internationalist analysis. This principle is also a principle that Black Alliance for Peace holds dear and is expressed through its Africa team and the US Out of Africa campaign and its anti-AFRICOM campaign. Malcolm, even before he broke with the Nation of Islam, hosted a solidarity meeting with Fidel Castro in Harlem and praised the Cuban Revolution as a quote unquote real revolution. It is again also reflective of the anti-imperialist solidarity that Black Alliance for Peace exemplifies with anti-colonial people of the world struggling for human rights in the Caribbean, South America, and around the world. Malcolm gave a lecture at the London School of Economics less than 2 weeks before he was killed, where he again showed his strong line on internationalism when he lifted up the spirit of Bandung, referring to the conference held in 1955 of African and Asian leaders in Bandung, Indonesia, who were unified in making an anti-colonial statement. Two of the leaders of this conference, Presidents Nasser of Egypt and Nehru of India, went on to organize the non-aligned movement, which eventually developed in the founding of the Tricontinental in revolutionary Cuba, which has already been mentioned by Dr. Charisse. Malcolm understood that the concept of human rights was one used in the United Nations in their Declaration of Human Rights, and in that order, for any grievance to be heard, they have to be classified as human rights, not civil rights. As long as it was considered civil rights, it would remain in the jurisdiction of that particular government. This led Malcolm to take his grievance to the human rights abuses suffered by African Americans to the 1964 meeting of the Organization of African Unity on behalf of the Organization of African American Unity and African Americans, so that the OAU could then take it to the UN. One of the objectives of the OAAU was to come up with a program to make our grievances international, thereby making it a problem of humanity in the world, not merely a US American problem. It was also on this trip in 1964 that Malcolm, in his trip in 1964 to Africa, that Malcolm met the leaders of the Palestine Liberation Organization, who educated him on the situation of Israeli settler colonialism in Palestine, prompting him to advocate for the support of the Palestinian struggle against Israeli apartheid, once again helping us through his international solidarity to decolonize our thinking and our acting. Of course, this ideological solidarity went on to take hold in the Black Power movement with SNCC first in '67, and then the Black Panther Party later on as well, in solidarity with the Palestinian struggle and anti-Zionism. More on helping us to decolonize our thinking, Malcolm X explained that in the US, the press and many people refer to this country as America. And because of US exceptionalism, not acknowledging that America is a continent and not a country, he goes on to talk about the important fact that there are more Black people in Brazil and that they're here than they are here in the US. And combined with all other South American and Caribbean countries, the force of the Black population united would be a force against empire. he elaborated on Congo, especially showing how he explained neocolonialism to help us again in our decolonial thinking, where he said that the US paid mercenaries were committing mass murder and dropping bombs on African villages. But he said there was no outcry, even among white liberals, because they made it appear that it was a humanitarian project. He warned that they will do it to them today and they'll do it to us tomorrow. They take Tshombe as a criminal, the one who facilitated the murder of Lumumba, and make him head of state. The US supported Tshombe. They went on to support Mobutu. For 32 years, Mobutu was the man of imperialism, US imperialism and European imperialism in the Congo, who facilitated the pillage of the resources of the Congo. And Mobutu got his share. There's an African economist named Leonce Ndikumana who writes about capital flight in the Congo, in Africa in general. He pointed out that when Mobutu was overthrown after 32 years, he had a stash of $5 billion with a B dollars in foreign banks abroad. $5 billion, that's 4 times the GDP of Guinea-Bissau, imagine. Kwame Ture went on to say that Malcolm was the first person he heard speak out against the war in Vietnam. Malcolm took a strong position against the draft at the time, likely leading to his friend Muhammad Ali taking the same position, thereby sacrificing his title and preferring imprisonment than to go fight in an imperialist war against the Vietnamese. In conclusion, I want to say that the Black Alliance for Peace follows the tradition of the Black radical anti-war movement, opposing the war perpetrated domestically against Black, Indigenous, and poor people, as well as internationally. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brother Sobukwe. We appreciate you. We appreciate your wisdom and your words. Thank you very much. And next we have Esther. Please unmute yourself. Esther Ojulari, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. I'm just trying to share my screen here because I have a short presentation. Thank you so much to the organizers. Thank you to BAP. It's a real honor to be part of this distinguished panel on this really special occasion and special talk. Okay, so I'm going to talk, I was invited to talk today about people-centered human rights and what it means for our collective Black struggles, and particularly here in Colombia, where I live and work. So for me and in my understanding, and I think for the processes here, people-centered human rights is about decolonizing human rights, as my colleagues have said, understanding that the human rights system, institutions, theories, practice, are constrained by the same paradigms of coloniality that all state-centered institutions are constrained by. So that's to say that the colonial ideologies that underpinned the initial colonial project and enslavement, white supremacy, patriarchy, accumulation, capitalism, and Eurocentric epistemologies rooted in liberalism continue to inform institutions today. We need to understand human rights, or the root causes of human rights, as being the ongoing colonial, extractivist, in many cases, economic model, particularly here in the context where I live and work in Colombia on the Pacific coast. So this model, this economic model, which seeks to control territories, resources, and peoples, is rooted in those colonial ideologies. It puts the economic interests of private actors above the rights and the lives of colonized and oppressed peoples, and it justifies violence in the name of progress. But the human rights system has largely not been able to address these root causes of human rights violations, which is why 70 years later, we still have deep, widespread, grave human rights violations. And I think that we need to look back at what the human rights system is about and understand the coloniality of the human rights system itself. So if we look at the origins of the human rights system, it's born at a moment in a response to the atrocities and crimes against humanity committed during World War II. But this proposal or this project for universal human rights is led by European states that have been committing the same kinds of atrocities and crimes against humanity against colonized peoples for 500 years, and are continuing to do so as they are in elaborating and enacting this human rights system. So there's an ongoing context of colonialism, apartheid, and segregation. And some of these hypocrisies, I think, of the early human rights system were brought in those documents that Dr. Burden-Sully mentioned from the early Black radical engagement with the UN, particularly in the second document, An Appeal to the World, where they highlight and question the fact that the UN chooses to put its headquarters in a country that has racial segregation, whilst talking about democracy, universal human rights, and equality. The use of human rights discourse to justify humanitarian intervention, when really this is around strategies for imperialism. The emphasis, certainly before, not so much now, but on individual over collective rights. All of these are kind of emblematic of this coloniality of human rights. And often we find that state-centered human rights institutions and processes are very able to focus on manifestations of human rights, but tend to avoid these deep analyses of the root structural causes of human rights. Recently, a report from the Special Rapporteur on Racism, which I think is a historic report, recognizes this, and she says international law played an important role in consolidating the structures of racial discrimination and subordination through the colonial period. And part of the problem is that international law has not fully been decolonized and remains replete with doctrines that prevent, in this case, reparation and remediation of the inequality and injustice entrenched in the colonial era. So this report is around historical reparation for enslavement and colonial crimes, but she recognizes the limits of the human rights system and international law as this system hasn't been decolonized itself. So people-centered human rights is a response to this coloniality of human rights. People-centered human rights are those, and a quote from Djibo, those non-oppressive rights that reflect the highest commitment to universal human dignity and social justice that individuals and collectives define and secure for themselves and through social struggle. And again, as colleagues have mentioned, this idea is very much rooted in Black radicalism, which centers around internationalist approaches, anti-capitalist approaches, anti-imperialist and anti-war approaches to human rights, and those early engagements with the human rights system. Djibo, in the piece that I cite here in 2013, presents a model for human rights, and I want people-centered human rights. I wanted to share that with you today and see how that kind of fits with the work here in Colombia. So the idea is that people-centered human rights emerge from a locally grounded struggles against multiple forms of oppression in the context of global capitalism. And it's about moving away from state-centric processes to people-centered processes. It's an anti-oppression approach to human rights. It's about transformative processes, dismantling colonial relations of domination, and a decidedly political project. It's about deconstructing the very Western liberal roots and epistemologies of human rights, and people defining their own content and meaning of rights. And I put together this model a little while back as I was doing my thesis research to try and kind of conceptualize this. So what the people-centered human rights process or model needs is an epistemological break with Western Eurocentric liberalism. So epistemologically, we're rooted more in intersectional analyses, in Black feminist analyses. It requires a reconceptualization of human rights from the standpoint of oppressed groups. So particularly in terms of ourselves developing and determining the meaning and content of human rights. It's about restructuring prevailing social relationships that perpetuate oppression and transformative. It's about acquiring power on the part of the people who are oppressed to bring about that restructuring and thinking from a political perspective how to transform structures. So I wanted to bring that down to the case and the experience of the city of Buenaventura on the Pacific coast of Colombia, where I've lived and worked for the last 6 years. Buenaventura is a majority Black city on the Pacific coast. It has been gravely affected by the armed conflict, the internal armed conflict in Colombia. And the population of Buenaventura have been victim of grave violation of human rights, economic, social, and cultural rights, crimes against humanity, civil and political rights, and ethno-territorial rights as well. And all of these rights violations are underpinned by these multiple colonial ideologies that we've been identifying here. So this is very much in the context of neoliberal development processes focused on profit and accumulation. There are projects around port expansion in infrastructure, which has basically used strategies of violence to displace, dispossess communities to gain territorial control. We can see how racialization, dehumanization, and white supremacy operate in this town, in this city, to deny the rights of Afro-descendant people, where whiteness is seen as synonymous with progress and development, and Blackness is seen as in opposition to development. Afro-descendant communities or communities of the Afro-descendant people are seen as an obstacle to development. And in that sense, the colonial concept of the just war in the name of progress justifies the violence against the communities for the greater good of development and progress in the country. And this is where we see huge rates of assassinations, killings of social leaders, particularly social leaders that are dedicated to defending territorial rights, defending economic justice, and defending the peace. We also see the dynamics of intersectional oppression, where femicide and violence against women is used as a strategy to not only violate the rights of women directly, but to spread terror and fear among communities, to destroy social cohesion and cultural practices and identities. These are two images that I wanted to share with you, which contain, and we're constantly receiving images like this, which can show development plans in Buenaventura. And both of these development plans are literally plastered on top of communities, of Black communities. So the first one is a port that's being planned. It's just been granted a license during the pandemic when everyone was distracted and looking the other way, which not only is going to empty the territory, the community that lives there, which I think is Punta del Este and part of Santa Fe, but also destroying the natural environment, the mangroves there, which are an essential part of the local ecosystem. And the other one is a seaside walkway, which is plastered on top of seafront communities that have lived on those territories for generations, and those are ancestral territories. So these photos are incredibly violent. Sorry?
Sorry.
Okay. So despite these human rights violations in Buenaventura, we see how the response to human rights violations is constrained again by this coloniality. So the state denies the existence of Black communities, often violating the right to free, prior, informed consent around development projects. There's a very much a state-centric structure in which the state has the responsibility, but also decides who are the subjects of rights and who aren't. The state and private companies undermine judicial decisions around Afro-descendant rights. And then there is the response to human rights violations isn't economic and social justice, but militarization. So this image here, you can see how that militarization looks in Buenaventura. Private companies, we see huge waves of human rights violations are preceded by the growth in infrastructure projects and the expansion of the port. And even human rights organizations are often limited in the extent to which they give real structural analyses of the dynamics of the human rights from this decolonial perspective. So just to finish, I wanted to talk a little bit about the processes of resistance in Buenaventura. This is an image from the strikes that were held in Buenaventura in 2017, 22 days in which the community went on strike. And among the strategies was to block the port and block the entrances to the port, so that these big international companies, which through which 70% of Colombia's imports and exports actually pass through, were not able to operate for 22 days. And this is an incredible achievement, but this was building on decades of resistance and mobilization in the territory. So we can see how people-centered human rights operates here. It was about focusing on collective rights and solidarity over individual rights, focusing on intersectionality, gender and gender oppression and the role of young people, very much a focus on rights rooted in a relationship of people to territory, environment and culture, and rejection of developmentalist language and destructing this kind of myth of modernity and what modernity in progress is all about. There's a reconceptualization of human rights, and the organization that I work with, PCN, Black Communities Process, has developed an own vision, an own language of human rights, which again is very much around territory. So it's the rights to be a collective Black community, the right to a space or a territory to be a collective Black community, the right to exercise being a Black community through political participation and autonomy, the right to an own vision of the future, so an own vision of development, an own vision of what progress and development actually looks like for us, and solidarity with the international Black movement. And these rights are understood as interrelated, interdependent, and indivisible. This process, and particularly this last process with the strike, is about challenging the neoliberal model. So the blocking of the port was incredibly symbolic, because we were literally blocking neoliberal economic activity, demanding human rights, demanding territorial rights and economic justice, and aiming to reclaim control of local resources. Again, this had a very globalist perspective, a very internationalist perspective. Understanding the root causes of oppression are international and global and not only local, and very much focused on autonomy and self-determination. And finally, very much grassroots strategies around community empowerment. So community education, human rights observatories in which people are participating. There are thematic committees and working groups around the strike to keep the demands going, artistic interventions, mobilization, everything incredibly participatory and grassroots. And this culminated in a political project through which members of the strike committee launched a political campaign and got one member of the committee actually elected as mayor of Buenaventura, which is a historic achievement, because it was the first time in a long time that there's been a democratically elected mayor who comes from a social movement and is for the people. So this, I think, is a really current and relevant example of people-centered human rights. So I'll leave it there and look forward to continuing the discussion. Thanks so much.
All right, thank you so much, Esther. We appreciate it. That was really fabulous. Really, especially enjoyed the automation of the definition of people-centered human rights and the intersection of everything. That was fabulous. And finally, we have Kali Akuno of Cooperation Jackson. Kali, please unmute yourself. You have the floor. Please take us home.
I will try my best. Good evening, everybody. As many of you know, we are in the middle of a record-breaking storm here that unfortunately most of these southern states are not equipped to deal with. So I'm mentioning this only because I saw a few minutes ago my lights flickering and the power's been going on and off. So if I should disappear from folks, it's not because I don't love you, not because I didn't want to be with you. It's going to be something beyond my power to control. Now, that said, I just want to pick up a little bit different than what I had planned on doing, but just pick up on one aspect I want to touch on borrowing from and learning from Malcolm's legacy, a piece that I want to touch on how we actually are going to get to the place where we implement a people's human rights centered vision. And that is through our own self-organization. First and foremost, the piece that I think is often missed about Malcolm's legacy is his actual role and his actual ability and strength as an organizer. Often, in the history books and the common portrayals of Malcolm, there's a focus on the clarity he provided in his speeches, both ideologically, politically. There's talk about how he sharpened our minds, but little attention is actually paid, and little is really written to a certain extent on the tireless work and the successful work he did as an organizer, both building up the Nation of Islam and then building the Organization of Afro-American Unity, and then building the Muslim Mosque Incorporated. And I really want to highlight, the work, because he had a longer period and a longer track record within the NOI, that when he joined the NOI, we have to remember, part of this was because of the time period, but some of this we have to attribute to his own tireless efforts. And that when he joined, it was, I think, just an organization, spiritual organization that had, I believe, 15 chapters. And by the time he left, there was no major, quote unquote, American US city that did not have a branch of the NOI, the Nation of Islam. And he organized well over, 100 temples in that time. He started a newspaper, Muhammad Speaks, so that they could tell their own story, put out their own perspective, put out their own views, and then organize our people on our own independent basis. And within that, he codified something that wound up becoming legendary in the NOI version, but also in the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense version. That was the 10-point program, right? That was something that we have to look at as a tribute to Malcolm and his ability to synthesize messages, put it out, and make it digestible for the people. A critical skill that he had that we have to kind of continue to replicate and bring down in our ongoing work to organize the people and organize them on the basis of self-organization. Now, what do I mean by that? Because there's a lot of Black folks and a lot of organizations, particularly throughout the United States. How many of them are really self-organized, meaning they're focusing on Black self-determination, Black self-defense, self-respect, and self-reliance? Very few of our organizations have that fundamental premise and basis to them at this particular point in time. And we are too dependent, I would argue, in this day and time, on the goodwill of others or being appendages to their organization, so that when their will or desire changes, we are either left in the cold, literally, like we are here where I'm at in the South, or we just discarded and thrown away. And we have to internalize that lesson, which, we preach into the choir to BAP, but I'm putting this out to anybody who's listening who's not a member of BAP, and you're looking for a political home. This is a place that you can find one that is focused on those 4 fundamental principles to bring us home. Because as it's clearly articulated, no state is going to grant us anything without a basis of us having our own power to first practice it and actualize it. None of the stuff, that Du Bois was fighting for, that Robeson was fighting for, that Shirley was fighting for, none of this was able without their own self-organization. And the things that people had picked up from previous generations, we cannot sacrifice that and think that some goodwill is going to come out of the United States government or the British government or any other government, right? Even ones that people who look like us presently control, that anything is going to come out of that without a high degree of self-organization, where we are, one, practicing the principles of what we are upholding in a prefigurative way on a day-to-day basis within our own work to the greatest extent possible, and then providing a transformative example to our folks in our community that they are attracted to and want to pick up, and then organizing ourselves within the greatest capacities that we know to transform the material relations around us. That then the states and the forces of capital not only will have to respect, but have to basically get out of our way or either be taken over. This is the basic legacy that we got to build upon for Malcolm that I want to bring home. That's just an add-on to everything that was stated, which, I'm so glad the foundation of our history and how our folks have laid out and developed this concept of a people-centered human right was clearly laid out. We need to break this out and share this to other folks so people have a clear understanding that even though that stuff was framed in 1945, primarily by the United States and its allies, they didn't do so alone. They didn't do so absent of our history, and they didn't do absent of our contributions. Du Bois was there making arguments, and then how we wind up trying to utilize those tools in our own defense, both within the United States and internationally, shaped the contours of this. Wasn't perfect, you know, because of the asymmetry in power, but it's a framework that we built upon and we have to build further upon to give clarity to our folks so they're not confused in thinking that the Constitution or something like it, whatever may exist where you are, is going to be the end all, the be all, the perfect guarantor of your rights. We have to be the guarantor of our own rights, and that requires self-organization of our own communities and our own people. So that's the message I want to leave people with. Now, I say that because many folks, I think, are under the illusion that something critically changed in January when the heads of the empire in Babylon Central, that where I'm presently located, when they decided to change the guard, that something changed, that there's some new space that's done radically opened up, and there's going to be some new framework within the world order that will give more space to people to move in the structure. Nothing could be further from the truth. If anything, the empire's told us they just trying to do a reset button of the matrix and go right back to the same old exploitation and extractivism that they've been practicing the past 500 years. And we have to send a clear message that was nothing to go back to, and we got to set a new standard in a new way of going forward and bring our people into that. It's going to take a lot of arguing, I would argue, with a lot of our own folks who are deeply wedded to the Democratic Party, either strategically or tactically, to move out of that particular realm and look towards each other. And when I say towards each other, I mean our folks, whether they're in the Caribbean, whether they're in South America, whether they're in Europe, or whether they're on the continent, we have to look towards each other to find our own liberation. I want to end with that so we can open up for questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kali. And, you know, I thank all of our panelists so much for your wonderful presentations. And I know people have a lot of questions. I have 3 topics with, I think, 6 or 7 questions here in front of me. But Kali, you ended on a point that I think I want to pick up and ask to all of the panelists about the need for African people in this country to divorce ourselves from the Democratic Party and certainly from the Republican Party, and to look to each other internationally. And specifically, you noted that, you know, people are under the impression that something changed in January in the empire with the changing of the guard. I want to pose this question to all of the panelists, and I want to start in the order that you presented. So I'll start with Dr. Burton-Stelly. In the context of Malcolm's work, his focus, his Pan-Africanism, his internationalism, and the focus on international human rights, how would you think he would frame the way Africans in this country have rationalized having to vote for a Biden administration to get rid of the Trump administration, which was supposed to be the the end of all humanity on earth, and did it also in hopes to get some domestic policies that would be helpful to us here, but sacrifice the well-being, the health, and the very lives of poor working class and oppressed people around the world, in Venezuela, in Haiti, in Colombia, in Ecuador, in the Americas, that are the targets of US imperialism. What do you think Malcolm's message would be to us in this position right now, Dr. Burton-Stelly, as we are dealing with the result of that choice that many of us had made to vote for Biden, hoping to get stuff for us here while people around the world still suffer?
Yeah, I mean, I think first and foremost, I really think that Malcolm would have had a field day with that call between Biden and the so-called civil rights leaders, where he was Massa Joe, whipping them into shape and shaming them. I think he absolutely would have pointed that out. Probably had something to say about, you know, the field Negroes and the House Negroes and the ways in which the Democratic Party is not for us, right? And even to the extent that they can make particular types of concessions, those are built on the super exploitation, the imperialism against and the oppression of nations in Africa, in the Caribbean, and in Asia. It is predicated on the increasing Cold War with China, which, by the way, ordinary people bear the brunt of that. Tariffs means that we just pay more for goods, period. It is not in our benefit. This whole, you know, Buy America plan or whatever it is that he's purporting is simply a way to try to shore up a blanched and desiccated, to use the terminology of one of my colleagues, this blanched and desiccated imperialism. And so I think that, I mean, the other thing too, I think that Malcolm will point out is where our money at? They still owe us 2 racks, right? And so already they have been in office less than a month and have already reneged on key campaign promises that allow for not only the election of that administration, but also the election of Ossoff and Warnock in Atlanta, right? A lot of people voted for them precisely because of that. All for what? A dog and pony show to impeach Trump on some bullshit, right? And not even on the sort of, as y'all know, on By Any Means Necessary, not even on the sort of real insurrection, but on some speech that he gave. And so to me, I think Malcolm will point to all of these contradictions and the ways in which we need to link the absolute dereliction that is manifest in Texas right now and in other parts of the South to the ongoing imperialism in Haiti, to the ongoing imperialism in Venezuela, in Cuba, the sanctions. And I think that all of these are 2 sides of the same coin. And so we can't get sidetracked by these domestic policies, which are ultimately crumbs and which only serve to reproduce U.S. imperialism and to stave off the ultimate collapse. So I don't want to speak for the good man, but I get a sense that might be some of the critiques he might make.
Indeed. Brother Sobukwe, your thoughts?
Let me unmute myself. I would ditto what Dr. Sharice said, and I would add that Malcolm would have been decolonizing our thinking even long before Biden, especially with Barack Obama. And he would have definitely identified him as a house Negro and a neocolonialist, just basically serving the master. And he would have been horrified at the bombing of Africa under Obama's watch, when U.S.-led NATO bombed Libya. We're coming up on the 10-year anniversary of that bombing. Malcolm would have been horrified at that. And Biden is just a product of Obama, basically. So I'm sure Malcolm would have not sacrificed the well-being of lives in Africa for a promise for some crumbs in America, or in the United States, rather. And I think, you know, that's commonly what many, too many, I should say, not all, but too many people in this country, Black people, see, well, you know, again, the lesser of 2 evils. I don't think Malcolm would have been trapped into that line of thinking. So that's what I would say.
Indeed. Sister Ojulari, what do you have to say?
No, well, I mean, I think my colleagues have really encapsulated what I would say as well. But I would just add, I think that he would also point out that the dangers of this constant use of discourses around anti-racism and racial equality and gender equality that the so-called left uses to bring in, Black people to support their politics. And using those discourses to gloss over what is essentially the same neoliberal imperialist political model that has always been there. I think he would point out the dangers of that. And I think that, as Sobukwe said, this is about decolonizing our minds and understanding and deconstructing these narratives around the lesser of two evil and around what is progress and what is left and what isn't left. And I think that, as well as you suggested, Jacqueline, that the idea that there was a choice between sacrificing the rights of people in other parts of the world in order to have some kind of progress in the US. I'm not even sure of how much progress there'll be in the US under this same model, this same neoliberal model. So I think that what this really shows, and I think what Malcolm would, perhaps one of his responses would be, is that it really reveals the importance of strengthening our global movement, so as a Black African global people, so that Africans in the United States and Africans in the Americas and Africans in Europe understand these systems of oppression, that whether they say they are left or right, continue to oppress us, and that there would be more of an understanding of the implications of US politics and US foreign policy for brothers and sisters in other parts of the world.
Absolutely. And Brother Akuno, since you inspired the question, do you have any further insight or any further input?
I'll just end on the same point. I think that Malcolm would have been imploring basically the field Africans, i.e. us, to dig in, do the education work, do the organizing work necessary, and to really be challenging these house Negroes, because they are the only ones who are set to get any of the rewards and benefits, and they've made that plainly clear. And these are not folks we need to recognize without blame. I mean, they are in it to win it on a structural level, and they see themselves as citizens of empire at this point. So we got to draw some hard distinctions, I think, in our movement and amongst our people going forward, to deal with a lot of this serious confusion, political and ideological confusion that's out there, and unfortunately, which is growing. I mean, we exist in a time where there's a movement running around calling itself American descendants of slaves, right? So, we got some serious confusion and some serious internal work that we got to do. And I think Malcolm will be pointing this out and trying to figure, come with the shining light and call this out in a loving way, but calling it out to try to move people from these positions which only continue to subjugate our people and dehumanize us, at the end of the day, for a few crumbs, which in no form or fashion have ever been guaranteed, no matter what they offer to the Black petty bourgeois class, no matter how well they serve them or give them a few medals and a few jobs and a little bit of money. At the end of the day, when the empire wants to discard you, it will. So we need to be highlighting that home. And I think those are some of the things that, in addition to what's all been said, he would really be pointing out in the here and now.
Absolutely. Well, we did start a little late, so I'm going to dive right into the questions that you have posed, you viewers have posed. Some of the questions are to particular panelists, and we have them divided into topics. So I'm going to proceed by topic, and our first topic of questions is political vocabulary. Artemis, she asks of Dr. Sharice Burden-Stelly, two questions I may have misunderstood. Are you against identity politics, or are you against its liberal capitalist use? And they also ask, someone also asks, what were the sources, Dr. Burden-Stelly, that you quoted during your segment?
I am against politics rooted in identity as opposed to identity rooted in politics. I'm against identity reductionism and intersectional imperialism, period. Those quotes came from an article I wrote called W.E.B. Du Bois in a tradition in W.E.B. Du Bois in the Tradition of Radical Blackness. It is published in Socialism and Democracy.
Wonderful. The next question in the political vocabulary topic is from Paul Berry, who asks Kali Akuno, please explain how critical food sovereignty is to Cooperation Jackson's strategy, mindful that Malcolm's adversary and war criminal Henry Kissinger famously said, and he did say this, quote, control the food and control the people. Kali, that question is for you.
Well, that last statement clarified it. You know, food is a weapon used against our people everywhere. And I think I would encourage people to really understand how this weapon is used. Look at the US's response to Cuba and its food production over the past 50 plus years. How many times have they raided down on Cuba with infections, other types of diseases, or on Haiti, you know, when they eradicated the pig that had evolved to deal with the conditions there, right? To make folks subject, you know, and then we can look at things in our own communities here in the United States, those of us who are here, with, you know, how they've strategically utilized making certain quality foods that we often produce in our own yards, both inaccessible at the market, or make it illegal to grow in certain places, or to catch water and to do things for ourselves and our own communities as a matter of policy to make us dependent upon the systems that they constructed. So for us, this is a fundamental goal. It's going to take a while to accomplish, you know, because there's a lot of obstacles and a lot of things to overcome. But I would encourage every community where we have folks to try to make this a priority, you know, for the strategic reasons laid out, so that you're not dependent upon, you know, again, I'm a cite like Katrina as a crisis, or, you know, this blizzard that we're going through now. You know, we got a little insulation, I can tell y'all, from both storing food, you know, doing emergency prep and having that as an organization, but also growing and freezing our own stuff, right? Also in preparation, so that our members, at the very least, you know, don't have to be dependent upon going to the grocery store when they don't have access, or when they decide to shut down, which is what they've just done here and now. You know, the task and the struggle is to be able to extend that from a few dozen people to the 20,000 or 200,000 people that occupy our communities. And that's going to take a larger degree of organization. But our primary thing is what we're doing here now is to highlight the need based upon our real history, living history, and the sad examples of how this has been used as a weapon time and time again against us. So for us to not take this as a joke, but to take it critical and to look at the, you know, the farming operations that are going on, or the little gardening operations, how can you scale those up? You know, what contribution can you make to all these efforts in your own community to both scale them up in capacity, but also to politicize them, to make sure that they are on part and on target with who they're serving and why.
Mm. And you know, just a little personal aside, I have a little backyard garden in our home. My husband over here, he's not the gardener. He drags in the bags of dirt and mulch and helps me, you know, drag in the plants and stuff. But this year last year we decided to try container gardening in the front yard to reclaim the little postage stamp size lawn. And we use these plastic storage containers. And we had some food delivery one day during the pandemic. And the delivery driver looked at the containers and looked at the things growing in the containers and said, yo, that's a great idea. That's what's up. Can I take a picture? I'm going to try that. And I think sometimes we look at these kinds of efforts and we call them revolutionary, thinking we have to do something very, very big that feeds the whole community. But sometimes I really think it just starts with a really simple idea for how to solve a problem. And that is, how can I get more space to grow more stuff, and making it visible for everyone else to see. So I think that understanding that food is a resource and it's also a weapon. Controlling food is also a weapon that the system uses against us. Is very important. And I really appreciate that question and appreciate Kali Akuno's work and Cooperation Jackson's work. So the next topic of questions from viewers is on resources. Several viewers, Sister Ojulari, have asked you for a copy of your presentation. They would like to know how they can get a copy of your presentation. Esther? Oh.
Yeah, no, that's no problem. I can share the copy of the presentation with the organizers, and if you have a mailing list, you can send it out to those who request it. No problem.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
And everyone thanks you as well. The next question is for both Dr. Sharice Burden-Stelly and Brother Sobukwe. What are the introductory books about the topics that you both spoke on? Brother Sobukwe, how about you? What introductory books would you suggest for people to read on the topic you spoke on?
Well, on Malcolm, I would definitely read his book called Malcolm X Speaks, and also there's a book called The Last Speeches of Malcolm X. That's also a good book that captures a lot of his speeches in the last 2 years of his life, where he really spoke about internationalism. And it includes, his speeches about Congo and Pan-Africanism, etc. Also, just in terms of decolonization, reading on decolonization in general, there's, of course, the classic book called How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, which is a great book to understand how colonialism happened, how Europe underdeveloped Africa. And then, there's always the ideological factor to understand how to help to decolonize Africa. And some of our great heroes who contributed to that, such as Kwame Nkrumah, Amilcar Cabral, Sékou Touré, and others, Fidel Castro, Ho Chi Minh. I mean, you could go down the line. They all contributed to the ideological factor towards decolonizing our thinking, which is absolutely necessary because capitalist imperialism controls our thinking, and it is constantly co-opting even our language and our terms. That we can see the term human rights, it has co-opted that. So now it's forcing us to revolutionize people-centered human rights. So that's what capitalism does. It works 24/7 on co-opting ideas that come from the people and the culture that comes from the people, the genuine culture. It stays on its toes to co-opt our art, our cultural expressions, our political expressions. So in order to sharpen our analysis, those are some of the books we can start reading. W.B. Du Bois, of course, he's huge. We have to read his works. His analysis brings a lot in terms of understanding that double consciousness that we've been subjected to, the contradictions we have behind the veil and outside of the veil, souls of Black folk, etc. The world in Africa, Black Reconstruction, we could go on. I see Dr. Sharice smiling. I know she knows the whole list. So I'll stop there.
Definitely. Dr. Sharice Burden-Stelly, pick that up. What other resources introductory resources would you recommend?
Oops. Okay. So I just am gonna just talk about the books that are sitting right here that I was flipping through to prepare for this, but I do want to recommend this book, Paul Robeson, Here I Stand, which is the No Name Book Club, one of the books we picked alongside Rod Ferguson. I think it's The End of White World Supremacy. There's this book, African Americans Against the Bomb, Nuclear Weapons, Colonialism, and the Black Freedom Movement by Vincent J. Ntondi. It's about African American mobilization against the nuclear bomb. Claudia Jones Beyond Containment, which is an edited collection of her original works. Black Awakening in Capitalist America by Robert Allen. And then I've just started reading this, The Revolution Will Not Be Theorized by Errol Henderson. A lot of these books are American centered, but luckily Brother Djibo mentioned many books that are about Africa and the diaspora. And of course, we dropped it in the chat, but the very important piece by the theorist of people-centered human rights, Ajamu Baraka, in his work, From Civil Rights Back to Human Rights, Reclaiming the African-American Radical Human Rights Tradition. Again, it is linked in the chat. I also want to guide us to the resources tab on the Black Alliance for Peace website and start with our principles of unity, our campaigns, and the many resources we have about AFRICOM, about 1033, about the situation in Haiti currently, and about our ongoing work around these issues. So definitely check out the website, blackallianceforpeace.com. There are many important readings there that are important for political education. So there you go.
Absolutely. Definitely check out blackallianceforpeace.com. So let's move to the next topic of questions. And this topic is revolutionary tactics. So this first question is for Esther. Sister Esther, in light of neo-colonialism, the last stage of imperialism, according to Kwame Nkrumah, is decolonization a proper form of resistance process, or do oppressed people of the world need to find another action or view moving forward for freedom? Let me read that again, because I think I butchered that a little bit. In light of neo-colonialism, Esther, the last stage of imperialism, is decolonization a proper form of resistance process, or do oppressed people of the world need to find another action and view moving forward for freedom? What do you think, Esther?
That's quite a question. I think that it depends how we understand decolonization, right? Because there's different forms of decolonization, and I think we need to understand it integrally and holistically. If you had asked me about books to recommend, one of the books I would have recommended is Decolonizing the Mind, and I think a lot of this is about decolonizing the way we think, decolonizing the way we understand the world around us, decolonizing the way we understand the systems and institutions that operate to oppress us. So, and decolonizing our own educational processes and our own, going back to our own kind of ways of thinking, our own epistemological ways of viewing the world as Africans. And I think that that decolonization process is what underpins other struggles. So if we are able to undo and deconstruct the way we have been taught that the world works, the way we have been taught what development is, what progress is, what success is, that decolonizing of that thinking is what enables us to then enact other processes of resistance, which, for example, here where I live and work revolves a lot around territory, autonomy, and self-determination. So understanding that there are different ways of thinking about development, there are different ways of thinking about progress, there are different ways of thinking about what it means to live well. So the struggles are around territory, because without territory, we cannot have autonomy, we cannot have food sovereignty, and we cannot build our own political processes. But knowing or understanding as a struggle, as a people, that territory is central to our struggles, that involves some kind of decolonial process, educational, self-educational process within our communities to understand and bring ourselves back to that cosmovision and that way of understanding how we as a people relate to our environment, relate to our world, and relate to each other as well. So yeah, I think decolonization is always going to be relevant and necessary, but it's an element that gives us the tools to be able to carry out other processes of resistance.
Wonderful. So our next question is for Brother Okuno. Kali, what is our role in continuing to uphold these internationalist ideals and legacies of community building? That is the question for you, Kali.
Could you repeat that one more time? Or make sure
Sure.
I understood it.
Sure. What is our role in continuing to uphold these internationalist ideals and legacies of community building?
Well, I mean, we have to take them further. You know, I think that has to be our generation's legacy. And there's opportunities to do so that didn't exist 20, 30 years ago, in part because of the technology we're using now. Also some other, you know, shifts that have allowed more folks to move. You know, I think we have to be as proactive as possible in terms of promoting this, if only to deal with our own self-interest, you know, as a people, which is critical, you know, because we have to recognize the fact that because of the profound degree of instability in the world, economically, politically, the climate crisis is only intensifying, particularly in our homelands, that we know that there's going to be more folks on the move. There's already millions of our folks on the move from the continent up into Europe, you know, and where's the welcoming wagon for them? You know, where's the protection for them? You know, where are our forces who are defending them, you know, as they're trying to make the crossing over the Mediterranean? Because we know the way Europe is treating folks, they're just leaving countless folks in the ocean to die, or charging folks who are trying to provide some humanitarian aid to help people make the crossing soundly and safely. This is something that Pan-Africans need to be taking up, you know, and doing on a mass scale and a mass level. And we need to not act like this is not happening here on this side too. You know, we know there's massive amounts of Haitians who are on the move. We've been hearing, you know, about the number of folks who are coming as far away as Zimbabwe and South Africa, who are now marooned, you know, on the U.S.-Mexico border. Folks being, you know, either held in camps or worse. So we got to step it up, I think, in this regard, and be proactive in terms of looking for our folks and building those connections. And again, not relying on others to do some basic things that we know we got to do for ourselves.
Absolutely. And now, I'm not sure who this question is posed to, but I'm going to throw it out, and I'm going to choose a panelist to answer this question. So the question is, why do we think a third political party can fight corruption in a political system that's built on corruption? We don't need a new party. We need to build a parallel new system. Is there, let's see, Brother Sobukwe, what are your thoughts on that comment? It isn't actually a question.
Well, I think we need both, really. We need a new party that's not aligned with big capital, you know. That's the main thing. And because right now, big capital determines the policies of the duopoly, both the Democratic and Republican parties. And so we need a party that is not directed and determined by big capitalists, that can speak to the people's interests. But at the same time, I think we do need to do the kind of work Kali Okuno's doing. You know, we need to build dual structure. We need to do both of those things at the same time. So that's and educate our people so that they can decolonize some of this this dominant ideology and culture. That's what I would say.
Thank you so much. Now we have 5 minutes left because we do want to end the session on relative time and the amount of time that we went over when we were late. So we want to stop this session at 8:40. So we only have 5 minutes left. So I'm not going to be able to get all of the rest of the general topic questions, but I will get to as many as I can. So the first general topic question, I think it's related to the influence that Brother Malcolm had on the Black Panther Party. What do the panelists think of the movie Judas and the Black Messiah? Is it timely, considering the struggle that we are in? And any panelist can answer.
Can I read a Malcolm X quote?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I'm responding to this question, but not answered it. Okay, this is a quote that Malcolm X gave at the Organization of Afro-American Unity rally on July 5th, 1964. And here is what he said. It has nothing to do with this question. This is an important quote though. We have to make the world see that the problem that we're confronted with is a problem for humanity. It's not a Negro problem. It's not an American problem. You and I have to make it a world problem, make the world aware that there'll be no peace on this earth as long as our human rights are being violated in America. Then the world will have to step in and try and see that our human rights are respected and recognized. We have to create a situation that will explode this world sky high unless we are heard from when we ask for some kind of recognition and respect as human beings. This is all we want, to be a human being. If we can't be recognized and respected as a human being, we have to create a situation where no human being will enjoy life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. If you're not for that, you're not for freedom. It means you don't even want to be a human being. You don't want to pay the price that is necessary, end quote. And one might argue, I guess, to wrap it back to that question, that Fred Hampton paid that price and was willing to pay that price. And, you know, part of that price was being, you know, ratted out by, oh boy, William O'Neill. So anyway.
I would just add, look, it's here, whether we like it or not, the movie's here. So millions of folks are watching it. So let's do our best to intervene. And I would say try to put out some study materials that correct some of the narratives that are incorrect that are being put out there. I haven't watched the movie myself yet. We're gonna host a little party to do so. But you know, we had given out, we asked the folks who's gonna join us to watch the murder of Fred Hampton first, and to watch a couple of other things first, so they had him in his own words, and those who were around him, because it wasn't just him, but you know, Mark Clark and others. You know, so folks got a real taste of that, and then we look at this portrayal and then figure out what, you know, what were the gaps, what could we fill in, and direct people who live that, because there's still a number of those folks around. If folks have some deeper questions, to talk to them. I, for one, will say this: I don't particularly mind all the criticism I've heard about. Now, this is without seeing it, you know, about the infiltrator, because I think there's some critical lessons about how our movements have been undone, both internally and externally, that we constantly need to be reminded of, and we constantly need to learn from. So let's use it to the best of its ability, but let's not think it's a substitute for us doing our own thing and putting the things out. And if folks want to follow a model that's more or less that I've been trying to point to, and anytime it's come up in anything I've talked about, was how the African Liberation Support Committee used a Luta Continua in the 1970s to do some organizing, and that is be more of a model that I think that we should draw upon and build upon, and calling all of our creative folks to take that up and to do it in that particular way going forward.
Thank you. We are just about at time, so I'm not going to be able to get to the rest of the questions, but I do want to provide answers to a couple of the questions that people have asked. One of the questions is, what are your thoughts on Haiti? And well, we can tell you what our thoughts on Haiti are. If you go to blackallianceforpeace.com, there is an article that has been published on February 12th of this year, just a few days ago, regarding Haiti, the BAP official statement on Haiti and the Biden administration's posture toward the country and its people and its support of the brutal Moise regime is on the BAP website. Then this next question, I think, can best be answered by our national organizer, if he is willing and ready to come on and answer the question. But before I ask the question and have Ajamu Baraka come on and say a few words, I want to thank you all so very much. Thank you, Dr. Sharice Burton-Stelly. Thank you so very much, Djibo Sobukwe. Thank you, Esther Ojulari, and thank you, Kali Akuno, for your wonderful presentations, for your passion, for your hard work, and for your example. We appreciate you very, very much. And I would just like to say, in closing this discussion, ladies and gentlemen, we are at war. We are at war against a colonial, imperialist, warmongering, capitalist, anti-human machine. The 1033 program in this country operates in the same way that the United States military operates in Nigeria, the same way it operates in Haiti, the same way it operates in propping up and funding coup elements in Venezuela and Bolivia and all over the world. So the Black Alliance for Peace has official positions on all of these issues of anti-war, of advocating for peace and making the connections. This webinar is a part of a series, a Black Power educational series in which we confront these issues facing Africans here on this continent and Africans abroad, so that we can deepen our understanding of these issues and strengthen our international bonds. And the next Black Power educational series will be on revolutionary Black culture. That will take place in April. I would also ask you, as you are visiting Black Alliance for Peace and reading our information and getting information on the different campaigns we are involved in to abolish the 1033 program, to get the United States out of Africa, to end AFRICOM. Please remember that Black Alliance for Peace does not accept any corporate sponsorship. We don't accept any funding. So please consider supporting Black Alliance for Peace, and absolutely consider becoming a member of Black Alliance for Peace, because we can't organize without you. So here is the question that I wanted to save for our national organizer, Ajamu Baraka. The question is, what is BAP's ultimate goal? Working class revolution? Competing socialist party under capitalism? Black co-ops? Ajamu Baraka.
Thank you so much for that question. And I would echo and thank everybody who participated in this outstanding panel tonight. This is the kind of discussions we have to have among ourselves to get the kind of clarity we have to have in order to advance our people's struggle, in order for us to win. And thank everybody who stayed in these almost hour and 45 minutes for this very important conversation. And I hope that you join us again in April. I hope that you decide to get involved with this alliance. We are a struggling, developing alliance. We don't have all the answers, but what we do have is a commitment to our people, a razor sharp understanding of what we need to do. And we say very clearly and without apologies, we want revolutionary change. We have to have revolutionary change in this country and globally. We recognize we are part of a global system. There can be no liberation of African people in the US without the liberation of African people and all colonized and oppressed people globally, because we are all facing the same common enemy. So this process of the Black Alliance of Peace is the process for us to provide opportunities for people to organize themselves, to get clarity on what we need to do, to develop themselves as more effective servants of our people. That is our responsibility. That is our task. And That's all we need to say because it's been laid out tonight. So please commit to organization, commit to self-development, commit to collective action, and don't let anybody tell you, no matter what kinds of issues we had in the past, that we cannot overcome our contradictions and keep ourselves targeted in a positive way toward the victory that we know that we're going to be able to win one day. So thank everybody again. Let's get organized, let's struggle, and let's win.
Thank you so much, everyone, and we appreciate you, and good night.